All right, everyone, I think we'll go ahead and get started. That way we'll be able to start on time and we'll leave plenty of room for and time for you guys' questions. So first off, thank you for joining us. I'm really excited to talk to you guys today. My name is Joel Ramirez. I am our Director of USMLE Complex and Medical School Tutoring. We have two of our amazing tutors with us today. We have Alex Withers, which you can say hi.
Hi, everyone.
And then we also have Sam Taylor, who they're actually both technically fourth years, but technically research fellows. You guys have taken step 1 and step 2, and you've done your third year, but you've been spending the year doing research. Now you're about midway, and then you'll rejoin and finish fourth year. Is that correct? Awesome. So not only have they kind of had a chance to get through all their step exams, but they've also had a chance to get through third year and kind of have some clinical knowledge, and it really positions them in a great place to not only give advice, but also help with tutoring. So today we are going to be talking about effectively utilizing question banks. So we're going to just kind of cover a few things about question banks, kind of what are they, why they're important, and why you should even care. We'll go ahead and just kind of get an idea of where everyone is at. So I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll for us. If you can go ahead and just put your answer in and give us a good sense of kind of who is joining us today. Awesome. So it looks like most of our attendees are going to be in their second year. Makes sense, because that's kind of right now, I know there's a lot of anxiety with step 1 as you kind of are nearing your exam date. Really excited to see some first years and some other students here. It's, you know, step 1 is, it's never too early to really think about, and question banks could be used throughout preclinical years and throughout third and fourth year. So thank you for joining us. So this is kind of an overview of what we're going to cover today. We've already kind of welcomed and introduced. We'll talk very briefly about step 1, kind of some tidbits about step 1. What is it? What are the details? Why do we care? And then we're going to dive into question banks. And so myself, Alex, and Sam have put together a few slides kind of giving our tips and tricks and advice for how to use question banks, how we use them, how we advise students to use them. I think collectively between all three of us, we probably worked with 20, 30, maybe even 40 students. So we have kind of a good sense of what Q banks are useful for and how people kind of can benefit from them. And then at the end, kind of, you know, usually some of the most fun opportunities are going to be just to do a question and answer. So at the end, if you have any questions, write them down or something, or hold on to them in your brain. And then once we get to these slides, we'll open it up for question and answer, and then we'll be able to answer any questions. We'll try to focus on questions related to question banks, but if we have extra time and we've answered all of them, then we can answer pretty much any question related to step 1 studying. So really quickly, what is step 1? Step 1 is a very long and very challenging exam. Usually it is taken at the end of second year, although sometimes, you know, with curriculums changing, sometimes it's now at the end of third year. It's going to be approximately an 8-hour exam. You have 7 one-hour blocks. Each 1-hour block is approximately 40 questions. So you can do the math, and that's, you know, about 90 seconds per question. So you have to really get used to answering questions, moving through them quickly, thinking about them quickly, choosing an answer, and moving on, or you're going to run out of time. The extra hour is 45 minutes break time and then 15 minutes of a tutorial time, which you should be able to skip ahead. So it's functionally 1 hour's worth of break time. All questions are worth the same number of points. And importantly, there's no penalty for guessing. And I think that's important to kind of bring up when we're talking about using Q banks, because there's a lot of times you can get answers right without necessarily knowing what is the right answer. And using Q banks is going to be a great way to help you kind of get there and get those points. So we'll go ahead and pose another question to you. How important do you think these step exams are? And I'll go ahead and open up our next poll now. All right. Have you guys kind of give us your thoughts on how important both step 1 and step 2 CK are? All right, so it looks like most people think that it is very important, which I think is very accurate. The only thing that matters that might be a bit more extreme, you are trained to be physicians. There are more things that matter than your step 1 and step 2 CK scores, but they are very important. So both of these exams are places where you don't want to be held back. Oftentimes these scores are kind of to get you in the door, to meet a cutoff, and you really don't want to be stopped at the door, essentially. So that's kind of our goal. We're used to working with students to try to kind of help them reach those goals. So we'll go ahead and dive in, kind of talking about USMLE scores and why they're important. I'll kind of give my perspective as a current residency applicant. There are a lot of things that go into a residency application. And you as a person are very, you have a lot of really positive attributes as a person. So these are going to be reflecting your personal statement, your dean's letter, your letters of recommendation, all the awards and kind of all the things that you've done throughout medical school. These are all very important. The nice thing is with these kinds of scores like step 1 and step 2, if you're a very busy program director, it's something that you can very easily filter by. So if you get a list of students, you can literally just hit step 1, sort by score, and then they could just start from the top scores, which is 260s to 270s, and just work their way down. And so when you're talking about really busy program directors, it's just an easy way to kind of weed people out. And we don't want you to get weeded out. And that's kind of our goal, to avoid you being screened out. And so although all pieces of the application are important, this is a very objective piece of the application that you have a lot of control over. And you can have an opportunity to kind of put yourself in the game. So moving on to kind of the meat of our session, I'll add another poll coming up right here, is asking you kind of what question banks have you used, or if you haven't used any, feel free to not answer. Great. So I see about 50% of folks answered. And last time we've been having about 80% or so. So I would say that means not everyone has been using QBanks yet. And I see a pretty even distribution between UWorld, Kaplan, and USMLE Rx. So what that tells me is that not a lot of people are using question banks yet. And the question banks that are commonly being used for UWorld, Kaplan, USMLE Rx, almost equivalent. So that tells me that we're going to have a very productive next 30 minutes. And we're going to try to help convince you guys both to utilize question banks and then really how and which question banks you should be using. So I'll go ahead and get us started. So question banks, what are question banks? So question banks are simply just an online collection of questions. They're really useful because they are designed to be just like the actual exam's questions. They also have explanations of the answer choices. So this includes the correct answers and the wrong answers. So not only can you learn from doing the questions, but once you've done the questions, you spend a lot of time reviewing them. And sometimes the question banks themselves can almost be like an interactive textbook. And so it's a really great way for you to increase your knowledge and practice taking questions. In reality, step 1 and step 2 CK, they're multiple choice exams. You do need to know the material, but you also have to be able to answer multiple choice questions. They're really useful because they can simulate the exam. The programs feel similar and they look similar. So you can get used to looking at these multiple choice questions, get used to the highlighting tool, the flagging tool, the crossing out tool, and kind of get ready to take the actual exam. Some commonly used question banks you've kind of already alluded to with our poll: UWorld, USMLERx, Kaplan, and Online MedEd has some questions as well. I think most people would agree that they the first three kind of go in that order as far as quality. I think UWorld is probably the highest quality. I think USMLE is a decent second, and I'd say Kaplan is a third. And then most importantly is these are very important. You cannot take your exam without spending a lot of time with questions and with question banks. So the next question, when should I do questions? And so everyone has a different take on this, so I'll just give my perspective, and then when we get a chance to ask questions, you can ask Alex and Sam, and I'm sure they'd be happy to kind of give you their perspective as well. But I think that they should be done intermittently throughout content review. So if you're 3 months out from your exam, the first 2 months while you're reviewing first aid or you're reviewing a textbook, I think it's important to be doing some questions. Not necessarily a lot of questions, but some. So usually what I would recommend is something like Monday through Friday, do your content review, and then that weekend, do a few blocks of questions. And then very, very intensely 2 to 4 weeks before your exam. So the month before your exam, you pretty much only want to be doing questions. I also prefer doing them at the end of the day. My least productive time is at the end of the day. And so doing question banks is going to take me an hour each block no matter what. And so it was a way for me to be efficient. When I was really tired, I didn't want to read anymore. I didn't want to do flashcards. I would do my question banks the night before, and then I'd review them the next morning. So how should I do questions? So I typically recommend that when you're doing questions with content reviews, so early on in your studying, I think it's very useful to use questions to help direct your studying. So usually what I recommend is Monday through Friday, review content. On the weekend, do questions, but do questions specific to that content. So for example, if you're spending Monday through Friday reviewing cardiology and first aid, then on Saturday and Sunday, do questions from cardiology. And that's really useful because it kind of tests your knowledge and be like, I spent the last 5 days reviewing cardiology, but did I really understand what I was reading? You know, first aid is a lot of checklists, a lot of kind of bullet points. Oftentimes you'll read through them, you'll be like, I totally understand that. And you'll do a question bank and it'll be presented differently in a STEM and you'll be fooled. So it's a great way to direct your learning and take those learning experiences early on and try to use them to tailor what you're studying and how you're studying. And then 2 to 4 weeks or even slightly longer right before your exam when you're intensely doing question banks, always do them random. Very important to always do them random right before the exam. When you're going through questions and you know they're by topic, you can kind of get a sense of the answer. You know, if you're doing cardiology questions, you know the answer is going to be related to cardiology. When in reality, you're taking the exam, you're going to go from cardiology to biochem to biostatistics, and you don't really want to train yourself like that. So right before your exam, when you're intensely doing questions, do them random order. And whether you're doing questions during content review or right before your exam, always do them timed. Always do them timed. You really need to get used to spending 90 seconds per question. So you just always want to do them timed. Even if they're by topic or random, do them timed. You really want to get used to that, and just repetition is going to get you there. One thing that you can use question banks for is, I didn't do this too often, but some people find this useful, is to simulate the exam. So an 8-hour exam is a very, very long exam. I had not taken an 8-hour exam before USMLE, and I think most people have not taken an 8-hour exam before USMLE. And so it's kind of a good idea to see what it's like. And you can use question banks to kind of simulate test day. So you can use the same timing. You can practice your breaks and meals. You get used to the pacing of the day, and you can kind of get a sense of how tired are you going to be. You know, is block 7 going to be really hard? And if so, is there something you can do to try to build up your stamina or improve your ability to answer questions over a long period of time? I don't think you need to always do this, but I think doing this 1, 2, or 3 times before your exam date is going to be really valuable. I know some people, myself, would be like, you know, I don't want to take a big lunch in the middle because then I just get really tired and I get hit by major food coma right afterwards. And so I did this, and I recommend to a lot of people instead to have snacks. And know yourself. If you're a caffeine person or a coffee person, you know when you should be drinking coffee. If you're not, then, you know, probably not a good idea. You don't want to be all jittery on your exam day. So we'll go ahead and shift over to Alex, and she's going to be talking about reviewing questions and taking notes.
Hi, everyone. So like Joel said, I'm Alex. I'm a UCSF medical student. I think this is a great topic because I agree with everything Joel said. Question banks are like maybe the most important part of your preparation for these board exams. So I'm going to talk about a few things. First of all, how to review your questions. So I'll start off by saying that question review is an extremely valuable thing to do. Most of what I'm going to be talking about is based on UWorld because that's the only question bank that I personally used. But I think my advice can apply to any question bank that you're using. So they're really useful to review your questions for two reasons, in my opinion. First, because you need to get down your approach to a question. Like the reason you got a question wrong might not be because you didn't understand the concept, but because you're not yet used to like how UWorld or Kaplan or whatever you're using phrases their questions. So that's kind of like the first thing that is really helpful from reviewing your questions is getting your strategy down. And that's really important. Finding what mistakes you commonly make. Is it that you're reading through things too quickly or that you're ignoring the vital signs, like kind of getting that down. The second thing, of course, is just the content. So UWorld, for example, I think it has wonderful explanations for all of their questions that they ask. And for me, it was kind of like the primary resource that I used for learning in addition to first aid. And so reviewing the explanations and reading them is really important. For me personally, when I first started out studying for my board exams, this took a lot of time. Like I spent a lot of time reading the answer explanations and like going through everything that I had gotten wrong and making sure that I understood the concepts. So I think it's okay when you're on your very first pass of the material and it's like your first month that you're spending time studying for it, that you'll give yourself a lot of time to review questions. So like when I first started, for example, I was doing a lot fewer questions a day, maybe like even 20 questions. And I would spend a whole lot of time reviewing the explanations for them. However, when you get later into your studying and you're more, you're kind of having goals for yourself for what you need to accomplish in each day, you want to make sure that you're balancing spending an appropriate amount of time with questions, but not overdoing it. And like allowing your question review to prevent you from finishing your daily study goals. So for this, I have kind of like a strategy that I use. I basically base the time I spend reviewing a question on how well I understood it. So let's say that I got a question and I 100% knew the answer to the question, like didn't hesitate, got it right away. I will spend the least amount of time reviewing that. I'll read through the whole explanation, but then I'll really just focus on the educational objective at the bottom. Then there's that whole area where you sort of understood it, you used some process of elimination, and then maybe you guessed and you got it right. For that one, I might do something a little extra. Like that could be going to an external resource and verifying that my reasoning was correct, or taking a short note, like writing down a short note about the question, about why I got it right, or maybe something that I misunderstood. And then the last tier will be questions that you just didn't understand and you got entirely wrong. And you should really spend the most time reviewing those questions, in my opinion. So that's kind of a nice like framework to use for how long you should spend reviewing questions. A couple more things that I'll say is that the incorrect answer explanations are almost just as important as the correct answer explanation. So something that I learned while doing UWorld, which is a really well-written resource, is that all the incorrect answer questions are not sort of like a random compilation of words. They're usually testing you on something entirely like very specific that's related to the topic of the question. So I think it's very valuable to read the incorrect answer explanations because there are probably other questions in the question bank that are testing you on those exact concepts. So it's kind of another opportunity for you to learn those concepts, both when you're doing a question related to it and when you're reading it as the incorrect choice for another question. So that's really, really important.
I just want to make one comment. I noticed people are raising their hand in our webinar. If you go ahead and put your questions in the question and answer tab, we will get to them at the end of the webinar. So if you have questions or comments, go ahead and put them in the question and answer tab now, the Zoom tab, and we will.
And then one last thing on that previous slide. So the last thing I'll say is that you should really focus on the, like UWorld, for example, will bold certain things in their answer explanations, and then they'll have an educational objective at the bottom. While everything in their explanations is important and useful, you don't want to get bogged down too much in the tiny details of things. Like UWorld will have these beautiful diagrams with like every like interleukin like labeled on it. And you don't want to spend your time like reading through all of those things. You want to just make sure that you really are understanding the main concept. Okay, and then in terms of taking and reviewing your notes. So I think this is one of the like things that I'm most passionate about, and like something that I work with my students a lot on, is that we all as medical students have perfectionist tendencies. We want to take like copious notes and use like 8 highlighters and like all these different color pens, and like you end up with your own textbook that you've rewritten for yourself. I think that might work like throughout your regular coursework, but unfortunately for board exams, there is too much material for you to be spending your time taking notes to that degree. So I was like very guilty of that. I would take copious notes and then I would never finish my daily goal. So you've got to like break that tendency. Don't create your own textbook. Take notes in one place and have a system. So for me, and your system might be totally different from mine. For me, I made first aid into my like contain all resource. So what I would do is I would do my UWorld questions, and then I would take a short note in the actual section related to that question. And that was my one source of notes. You can also be a person that likes to use flashcards, like maybe you create flashcards, you like to do them on the bus, but I'm kind of like a proponent of taking notes in consistent places and having a system. That way you're not spending too much time on it. And then the last thing about this is that I would prioritize finishing your question goals over reading and reviewing your notes. I think, not to say that you shouldn't spend time on those things, but doing as many questions as possible is what I believe is going to give you the most breadth in your understanding. And then in terms of recording your progress, so this is something that we help students with a lot as tutors. I can't emphasize enough the importance of making yourself a detailed study schedule and then sticking to that study schedule. So in terms of for question bank purposes, you might have a couple phases. You might have a phase where you're just starting to learn the material and you're not trying to do that many questions a day. And then you'll have a phase where, like Joel mentioned before, it's like a month out from your exam and you're just spending most of your time doing questions. I would actually like write out which question banks you want to use, figure out how many questions each of those resources have, and then making yourself a clear and like detailed schedule. Like I'm going to do this many questions a day for this many weeks, and then I'm going to step it up as I get faster and do this many questions a day for this many weeks until you finish your goal, whatever that might be. And so there are lots of wonderful resources that will help you do that. CramFighter is one that we use a lot that we can answer questions about if you have it. But I used like an old-fashioned Excel spreadsheet, and that worked well for me. So whatever your method is, just have a place where you have goals. And then I'll say, make sure that your goals are achievable. So like at the beginning, you might be like, I'm going to do like 100 questions a day. And then you obviously can't finish that. And then you just abandon your entire study schedule because you felt like I got really behind and I forget my study schedule. That is why I emphasize like taking the first week to figure out what is reasonable for you to accomplish, making your study schedule achievable. And then if you get behind, just do a recalculation, which CramFighter and Excel makes it really easy to do.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. I just want to hammer down one more point that she said. It is great to take the notes. You want to take the notes, but don't hamstring yourself from doing other things just because you feel like you have to review the notes. Oftentimes, you just taking the notes in itself is a good learning experience. So if you have this huge textbook of notes and you think you're not going to get through reviewing all of them, that's also totally okay. And so we'll go ahead and move on to Sam now, who's going to be answering a few of these questions here for you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. I got to take this opportunity too to jump on some of these points that Alex mentioned. It's kind of amazing hearing Joel and Alex talk about these things, because when I was going through step one, I actually didn't look to a lot of other people for how to kind of model my study plan. And it's pretty amazing how independently we all have these very similar ideas about that. And I think that speaks to kind of their value in a general study plan. So just real quick, I want to mention that as Joel said, doing the QBake questions timed is nice because it more closely replicates the actual exam. It will get you in the rhythm of the test. Another great thing about it is that doing it timed will keep you efficient. And if you have 2,500 questions to review in a number of weeks, you don't want to be spending 3 to 4 minutes on a question. So it helps an efficiency standpoint too. And then also Alex's idea of putting the notes in the margins of first aid, that's like great, because first aid should be sort of your go-to reference if you kind of want to look something up quick. So the notes right there. And also it's great because if you confine yourself to the margins, it forces you to be brief. And you want to be brief taking notes. You really just want to get the big picture or something that the kind of key elements of it. So I think those are really good ideas. So talk a little bit about what scores mean and how to use score reports to your best advantage. So score reports, regardless of what QBank you use, or if you're going to be doing the NVM Ease self-assessments, for example, they'll give you a score report. And they can look different, but all of them have the same general idea that it's a comparison of your performance to the performance of other students like you who answered those same questions. And there are a few caveats to this. UWorld, for example, it'll kind of rank your performance on a given block of questions versus others. And also each individual question, it will tell you, for example, what percentage of students answer that question correctly. But it doesn't tell you if those students were doing it random, if they were doing it timed. Maybe Joel or Alex can weigh in, but I'm not sure if it calculates if it's their first time through or the second time. So if you're looking at those numbers, those are kind of causes. If you have a bad exam, it's not necessarily the end of the world. Maybe you're just compared to people who are kind of doing it content specific on time, for example. But the score reports are useful because they're broken down by system, and that's what their best use for the student comes in, because they can help you kind of zero in on what you need to focus on most. That said, if you only do, in UWorld, for example, 20 questions, it's not going to be an accurate indicator of what subjects are actually weakest. The NVMe self-assessments are nice because they'll give you like over 200 questions. So that's usually a pretty reliable report. But UWorld, for example, you should look at least a block of 40, and better yet, several blocks in succession. And if you consistently score lower in one system, for example, reproduction, then that's a good indicator that you should focus some dedicated review time on that. So, as I was mentioning, one element that you want to keep in mind is which subject did you do poorest on in the report. The next one is how important is that subject overall. And what I mean, for example, is if you did very poorly on biochemistry, for example, but biochemistry only comprises a small portion of the exam, then you might be better off spending your time taking a second look at your second worst subject, which was cardiology. And cardiology is a huge portion of the exam. So you want to kind of temper your assessment of your weakest subject with also which subjects are most important. I will also mention that some QBanks will break down, like not just by system, but by discipline. They'll say like diagnosis or problem solving, physicianship, that kind of stuff. And those are less useful than the system. So I would just pay attention to this, how they break it down by systems. One of the real nice things about UWorld is that they will also let you keep track of trends. So if you can notice, for example, that you've been improving, then you can kind of, that's an indication that you're doing well in studying and that whatever you've been doing is working. However, if you've been kind of not improving in some areas, but improving in others, then the trends can help you see that. And then the big question, should I repeat question bank? So this is actually kind of a hotly debated topic. Joel and I know are in agreement. Generally, we say no. And the reason being is that for the points I've outlined here is that the UWorld explanations are extremely dense, and Alex touched on this too. So you really want to be able to give the UWorld explanations adequate time. And if you're trying to do UWorld 2 or 2.5 times, then you might just kind of skim over those explanations when really that could be enhancing your score at the end of the day. The other thing is that fresh practice questions prepare you for unfamiliar topics. And even if you did UWorlds 3 or 4 times, you're still going to encounter some topics on test day that you've never seen before. And having only done fresh questions really prepares you to think about things you haven't already learned. And another way to put that is you only get one first pass through UWorld. So I tend to recommend students try to do that as close to their exam as possible. You know, it used to be 5 years ago, UWorld was really the only game in town, but since it's still the best QBank, but there have been USMLE Rx and Kaplan, for example, have been improving over the years. So you really owe it to yourself to add that other QBank and then still use UWorld toward the latter half. But if you use that other QBank in the first half, then you get, you know, tons more questions targeting new things that you haven't seen before. And really the variety is what will improve your score at the end of the day.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I completely agree. I don't know what your thoughts are, Alex, but I never recommend people do UWorld twice. And honestly, when you see in the questions once, when you're doing them again, like you notice things and you remember more than you think you will. And so then half the time, it's almost like a mind game of, did I choose this answer last time? Was it right? Was it wrong? And then you spend, I think it's testing almost different things versus like Sam said, if you have fresh questions that you're constantly completely working through from scratch. Yeah.
I mean, I think I did, you can see this for yourself if once you start using QBanks, just wait a couple weeks after you do a test and do the same test again. You'll be amazed at how much you remember. So I think that's definitely,
which is a good thing. It's a good thing you remember what you're going through. So we have several really great questions. I really want to make sure we get to them. So I'll make this quick. I just want to talk quickly about what one-on-one tutoring is going to be like and why it is useful for a lot of students. So one of the cool things and really unique aspects that we offer is a one-on-one personalized experience. So all of our tutors approach all of our students as the unique individual, which is accurate because everyone is a unique individual. So everyone has different strengths, different weaknesses. They learn differently. They need help with different things. And so if you were to work with our tutors, you get treated completely uniquely and everything gets personalized to you. So helping you select resources, helping you create a study plan, reviewing content with you, reviewing questions with you. Instead of sitting through a lecture in which nothing's personalized to you and half the stuff is things you already know or don't need, everything that you work with for your tutors could be directly applicable to your needs and only your needs. We have amazing tutors. As you could tell, Alex and Sam really know what they're talking about. And once we get to our questions, that's going to show even more. Our students do really well. They've been very successful on Step 1, Step 2 CK, the COMLEX exams. And then just one thing that we pair you with a tutor we think you would mesh well. We have several score guarantees and satisfaction guarantees. I don't want to spend a lot of time getting into them now. They are on our website and you can contact us, email us, call us, and we could talk to you more about these details if you're interested. Just one thing that I did want to say, because right now it's mid-February, come to us sooner rather than later. It is so much easier to help a student improve when it's 8 to 10 plus weeks before the exam and not 2 to 3 weeks. We can work with students at 2 weeks before their exam, but if someone comes to us a week or two before the exam and they need 20 points, that's probably not going to happen no matter what. And if we could do the best we can, but it could be very challenging. If you come to us 2 to 3 months ahead of time and you have clear goals, clear expectations, it is a lot easier for us to help you get to your goal. So if you are having any kind of doubts, you know, you're more than welcome to reach out to us. You can schedule a one-on-one 15-minute phone consultation with myself if you want to talk about details or you know, how tutoring would be useful for you, etc. So we'll go ahead and jump into these questions here. We have several great questions. I think we covered some of them while we were going through the webinar, but we'll pose this one. And a few people are asking what QBank is the best QBank, and I'll go ahead and give this to Alex.
So I definitely think that UWorld is the best QBank to use. I actually only used UWorld, and I didn't, it's not that I disagree with Joel and Sam, but I actually did do it more than once. I did UWorld once through where I used it as like a learning tool, and then once through more as like a testing tool. So I think that everyone's different, and I think certainly the other question banks are also valuable, but UWorld I think is by far the best question bank in terms of the quality of its explanations and how similar the questions feel to the real exam. Just like toward that point, I used NVM Ease like most people do to kind of like simulate tests leading up to my exams. And I noticeably felt that the question quality was poor in comparison to UWorld. And I felt like when I was taking the real test, they felt a lot more similar to the quality of the UWorld questions than the NVMe questions did. So I think that I would definitely say UWorld is the most useful one to use.
What do you think is the second most useful, Alex?
You know, so having been working with students now while being a tutor, I've heard wonderful things about Online MedEd. And so I feel like I really like their question bank a lot, especially because everything they do is so well organized and kind of paired with lessons and videos that you can also reference. And so I would say that's another great one to use.
Yeah, I know the Online MedEd question bank is a little newer. I often recommend people to use USMLE Rx, and I usually recommend them to use it during their content reviews. They save all the better questions essentially for right before their exam. Sam, I have a question for you. It's kind of I'm going to combine two of these questions. Should I use a QBank as a learning resource, or just as practice material? And then how should I take UWorld notes? Is it necessary?
So the first part of that question, should you use it as a learning resource or as sort of like a test simulator? I think I would go with it depends on where you're at in your studying. If you're very early on, I tend to break it down to my students that early on, especially right before you reach your dedicated period, which is usually 4 to 6 weeks before your exam date, you want to be building a foundation of content that will allow you to at least kind of have some standing to answer any question that they could throw at you. So while you're in that content foundation time, I think that it makes perfect sense to use one of the lower ranked QBanks like USMLE Rx or Online MedEd or Kaplan, and to do them by system, and then use those as kind of like built-in structure to learn those systems. So I think that those are the good use for them. And then as you get closer to your exam, it becomes really important. It's a 7.5 hour exam. So as you said, Joel, like I was in the same boat. I'd never taken such a long exam before, and it's definitely an experience. So you need to build up your stamina and you need to get in the zone. And that takes a lot of kind of test simulation. So as you draw closer to your exam date, it's more timed, random, using it as a test simulator. And the second part, it was about notes.
Notes. So how do you take notes on UWorld, and is it necessary?
Yeah. So I think taking notes is, I took notes, like everything in moderation. kind of fits for this one. Like Alex said, you don't want your note taking to impede your ability to keep up with like your daily quota of questions that you need to get through. So I liked her idea of kind of putting them in tiers when you're doing review. So you spend the most time on things you got wrong, the next most amount of time on things that you may have guessed at. Another useful that helps for doing this in UWorld is that you can actually sort your answers and the explanations by whether or not you got the question wrong. So what I would do, because I know that I don't naturally have very good organizational skills. I know that if I sorted by my wrongs and I started just like really paying attention to those wrongs and kind of annotating first aid with that, that by the end of the day, the next thing I would do would be I would sort and I would do the ones that I marked. And for me, that was like my second tier. So if I marked it and I got it correct, then that was my second tier. And then the last questions I would review would be the ones that I didn't mark and got correct. And by that time, I was like, I just wanted to go to bed and I was kind of rushing through it. But it worked out that way because I ended up taking the most notes on the things that I knew least. So that's kind of a natural way to build it in.
And Alex, I'll give you this one. Again, I'm going to merge two questions into one. How often should I do QBank? And then how many questions a day can be done ideally 2 months before the exam?
So I think this varies with like how your school will organize your like or give you the amount of time that you'll have to study. For me, I had about a month of dedicated like no class time to study, and then I started studying about a month before that. And I started doing the question banks right away. So I think that I would recommend, Joel said something a little bit different earlier. You can do kind of a content review during the week and then do your questions on the weekend if you're not really. You can also, there's an argument to be said for just doing a few questions every day as just to get kind of familiar with their style. And then in terms of how many is reasonable, that's going to dramatically change over the course of your study time. So UWorld twice. And so on my first pass of UWorld, it took me a very long time to get through the questions. I would do like 10 to 20 questions a day. And that was a lot for me because I was using the question bank to learn, which might be different for some of you. But then you'll find, hopefully, if you're practicing them on timed, as Joel, which I firmly believe in and which Joel mentioned earlier, is that you'll get faster and more efficient and you'll be able to do more questions in a day. So leading right up to my exam, I was probably doing like 3 and then sometimes even on a crazy day, like 4 40 question sets, which I think is important because like we mentioned before, this is a 8-hour exam. And so you need to build up your stamina and like your endurance for being able to think through that many questions in a row. So I would say grade yourself up as you learn more and get more efficient.
Yeah, great. And that kind of goes into our next question, which is, what can I do to improve my stamina for the exam? So I'll make a comment, and then since Alex just kind of said what she did, I'll also give it over to Sam. So for what I did, I think what Alex said is right on, really nailed on the head. But right before, like 2 to 4 weeks before your exam, you should be doing 3 to 4 blocks of 40 a day. I mean, you should just be, your life should be questions, just question banks right before the exam, and just get so used to learning how to answer questions, obviously trying to learn from the questions and understand the questions, but it's a multiple choice exam. You don't always need to know the right answer to get the right answer right. One of the things that I kind of found useful to build stamina is I always did my question banks at the end of the day. So I had a whole day of studying. I was pretty tired at that point. And so it was really challenging to focus on doing questions, but I really got used to doing questions, pretty tired and just kind of, over studying for the day. And then I would just review them the next morning. So I'd spend the whole morning reviewing my reviewing the blocks and reading. And then, at the end of the last 3 to 4 hours of the day, I would do my blocks for that day. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, so I think, we've kind of talked a little bit about how this is a very individual experience, and I think this kind of demonstrates that. But I, for example, I'm like my least efficient in the mornings. Like I'm groggy and I just don't want to really put my brain power into doing anything. So I was actually pretty worried that come exam day, I would be like in a mind fog coming in and sitting down and taking this 8-hour exam. So for me, I just kind of did all my blocks in the morning and then did review in the afternoon. But I think as long as like Alex said, you have a very detailed plan for how many questions you want to complete in every day, and as long as you hold yourself to that quota, it doesn't really matter how you do it. Although I would recommend doing them all in one block because you're not going to be able to take several hour breaks during the real thing.
So there are some questions on if you're going to use 2 Q banks or multiple Q banks, which one should you do first and which one should you do last? I'll let Alex and Sam, why don't you each kind of give your thoughts?
Sure. So I'll jump in and say I think I use USMLE Rx first, just because during that first part of my step 1 study period, I was like pouring through first aid, and for me, it was really hard to just read first aid. So I found it easier to use USMLE Rx, and if I got a question wrong, or if I was curious about something, then it was really nice because it just like pointed me to the page where I could go to and read about it in first aid. So it kind of guided it's held my hand a little bit in that sense while I was reviewing first aid. And then, but pretty quick, definitely by 4 weeks out from my exam date, I was almost exclusively using UWorld.
Yeah, I would just echo exactly what Sam just said. I would pick kind of like a different Q bank, whichever one you like for your first round, and then 3 to 4 weeks before, UWorld should be the last thing that you see and the last thing that you're doing right before your exam. So I would agree with that.
We had a good step 2 CK question. It says, for step 2 CK, essentially I'll summarize the question. A lot of folks use UWorld during their 3rd year rotations to study for shelf exams. Once they get to step 2 CK prep, should they repeat UWorld or should they do a different shelf, or where can they get additional questions for step 2 CK? And I'll give this one to Alex.
I personally did redo it. It had been like, your rotations are so many months spread apart, and so you don't have the same problem as like step 1 time where you will remember that exact question from when you did it before. So I did use UWorld while I was studying for shelves, and then I redid the whole thing again when I was studying for the step 2 exam, and I thought that worked well. There are far fewer questions for step 2 on the Q bank than there were for step 1. So I found that I had still maintained the stamina and endurance and was still used to doing the questions in that style from when I had done step 1. So I think many students will find that they can finish that again and then even maybe go to another resource after using UWorld.
Yeah, I'm with Alex on this. I actually did repeat the step 2 CK question bank, and it was a little different experience because you did some of the questions a year ago. There were repeated questions that I'd done, in my most recent shelf, but that was kind of the best I could do. I know a lot of people like the online MedEd question banks, and those are specifically for step 2 CK. And then I've also heard good things about Amboss as well.
And I'll add another thing about UWorld. Another reason it's great is that they're always adding new questions. So for me, by the time I was done with all my shelves and I was getting ready to take USMLE Step 2, they had added like a ton new questions. So I couldn't have possibly already seen those. So yeah, I think that's definitely a viable option to do that.
So we have another question. When should we start doing NVM Ease, and how often should we do them? And then I'll give this one to Alex.
There's different thoughts on when to do NVM Ease. Personally, the way that I did it and the way that I thought worked well is that I did one sort of at the beginning of my study period, not before I studied at all, but maybe 2 weeks into it, just to kind of give myself a good starting point. And then I did, I think, 2 to 3 more throughout the course of a total 2-month study period. So I think that's kind of a good strategy, kind of doing one towards the beginning, doing a couple in the middle of your study time as like a checkpoint, and then one like right before the exam. And I would say that the way that I used NVM Ease was really to simulate exam day. Like that's how I used my NVM Ease. I didn't use them for learning purposes. For those of you that haven't looked at them before, they don't have answer explanations a lot of the time. And then you can get lost in this rabbit hole of looking on like forums to try to find the answers. It's just, personally, I think it's not worth it to use NVM Ease as a learning resource. Use it to simulate exam day. And then you can also look at your general trend on NVM Ease. Like, am I generally improving in terms of my score on NVM Ease? Because I will also make a point of saying that like many people feel that certain NVMEs are really hard. And so like I happened to take one that I thought was really hard the week before my exam, and I did the worst on that, and it really panicked me. So I would say like use them to just simulate your exam day. Not so much for like interpreting the score and learning from them.
Yeah, I have to also agree with you, Alex. You know, I never recommend them to be used as learning tools, but rather to simulate the exam day and to get a sense of where you stand. You know, so are you making progress? If this is 1 week before your exam, you can delay your exam and your score is not within a range that is acceptable to you, then that's when it becomes a useful tool. But they're not good learning tools. You know, perusing through student.their network to try to find the answers that's some random person posted with no evidence or no citations is probably not going to be that great of a learning tool for you. Here's a question I'll send your way, Sam. How do you review the questions you had wrong? Do you do flashcards of the concept or just read it?
Good question. So I tried to use Enki a little bit. So Enki is a program many of you may have heard of that kind of, it builds in this model of spaced repetition. So it's kind of like flashcards that will kind of repeat showing you the flashcard if you had trouble with it more frequently than if you did it very easily the first time. So I tried to kind of construct my own Enki deck from USMLE questions that I had trouble with or I was curious about. But I found that to be too time consuming for me to do that. And it was just easier to see how I could integrate that information with what was already put in first aid. So my goal was really to try to take whatever question was in UWorld and find out what was the gap in my knowledge that caused me to get this wrong. And then I tried to correct that gap by literally just drawing it into first aid. So I tried to kind of make first aid my sort of comprehensive resource, filling those gaps. And my notes, getting into specifics, my notes, probably no one else could read them. It was probably like some hieroglyphic code that only I understood because it was so condensed and so contextual. But that was enough for me to just kind of have that memory hook. And I think that really is all students need. That's what I coach my students.
There's a question about, boot camps for step studying or, hyper condensed classes on step studying. Are you, Alex or Sam, are either of you familiar with those, or have either of you found those to be valuable with students?
I'm actually not familiar. I don't know if you are, Sam.
No, I don't have a lot of experience with them.
Yeah, I've worked with a few students who did them, and it didn't seem great. I think one of the problems with that is that usually you're attending a lot of lectures. So it's like 8 hours of lectures every day for like 2 or 3 weeks, which is probably not the best way to learn. It's usually kind of a small group or like 30 to 50 people in a room, so nothing's personalized. And so I think it's a very inefficient use of your time. You can imagine if you spend 8 or 10 hours a day studying and focusing on things that you specifically found difficult, you probably would get more out of it. A lot of times these boot camps too also require you to be in person. So people have to go travel to cities and leave their home and kind of, you know, be displaced. And it just seems like, doesn't seem like a best use of time or resources. See another question.
Yeah, I think, would the Becker courses fall under that category?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess I have heard of that, but none of my students have used it.
So people, we kind of answered that one actually, so I'll skip that one. For the student who is interested in MCAT tutoring, we do offer MCAT tutoring. It is a different division from our division. If you go to our website, you can contact someone or do a consultation with our director of MCAT tutoring, and he definitely can help you out. But we won't really be addressing MCAT studying during this webinar. How much time should I spend on QBank? We kind of already answered that, so we'll skip that one.
A lot.
Yeah, there you go. The conclusion is a lot. What is the best way to read a question? And I'll send this to, well, why don't you guys each kind of give your thoughts on it?
So I think this is like a super personal sort of thing. Like maybe people have different strategies, but I think like, first of all, a good general rule is like to find your strategy and then to always do it the same way. So for me, a common thing that I hear from students is that they read the whole like paragraph UWorld question and then they forgot what it said or kind of zoned out, and then they have to read it again, and it actually takes up a lot of time and they struggle with timing. So I'm a huge proponent of, when I read a question, like highlighting very carefully as I read through it. So I highlight certain things every time. Like I'll highlight the demographic features of the patient. Like, are they in their mid-50s? Is it a male? Like things like that. Then I'll highlight abnormal vital signs that they give me. I'll highlight like an abnormal exam finding. And then I'll highlight their complaints. So I developed like a strategy for what things I was going to highlight every time I approached a question. And then that way, if I zoned out or something, I could quickly look at just my highlighted words and refresh myself on what the question was asking. Another thing that I'll mention is that some students like to read like the very last line of a question first so that they know what the point is. So like it'll say like 50-year-old male, blah, 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 blah. Like, what is the diagnosis? They want to know like, okay, this is a diagnosis question. And that will kind of frame the way that they read the whole thing. And I actually think that's a really nice strategy. I don't know if Joel or Sam, if you agree with that, but I think it's a good way to go about it.
Yeah, I didn't do that at first. It wasn't until step 2 that I started, or until my shelf exams, that I started reading questions that way. But I actually like it a lot, and I think it will be something that is going to become even more important in the future as the vignettes become longer. It really pays to have that focus at the outset to know what you're looking for. And I'll also add that, like Alex said, I had a similar strategy. So what I recommend my students do is read the last line of the question, scan through the answer choices. Sometimes the last line of the question will be like just essentially, what is the most likely diagnosis? But if you scan through the answer questions, that can kind of put you in the universe of the question. So that can give you an advantage, because if, for example, all the answer choices are cardiac pathology, then you immediately know to cue into cardiac versus like some weird immunology thing. So you can really narrow your differential pretty quick. And then, yeah, so highlighting things was useful for me because it kept me in the flow of the question. Like I would just automatically highlight demographics, key lab values, like the vitals, things like that. And then by the time I finished the question, I had kind of this map already drawn for myself. So all the key information was already available. Another thing is on really long questions, when you're reading through, you sometimes might have the feeling that you're not understanding it. And I tell my students, just keep reading. It's really important to get that first complete read done, because a lot of the time you're picking it up, kind of like when if you're doing the dishes or something and you cue into a part of a conversation that you weren't aware that you were listening to because a key word came up. So that same kind of process happens, and it's really important to get that first read to just get the information down, and then you can go finding the pieces that'll help you put your answer together after that.
Awesome, Sam. So I think one thing that kind of tied what Alex and Sam both said is utilize the highlighter, utilize, being able to cross out answers and things like that. And kind of to what Alex said is get used to doing the same thing over and over and over again. So every time you see a question, it's just, you're just kind of like a machine who's just going through and demolishing questions. One last question we'll quickly answer. How similar is UWorld to step one? It is very similar. UWorld questions are very challenging and often very frustrating, and the exam is very challenging and always very frustrating. So I remember when I was going through UWorld, I'm like, this is a ridiculous question. There's no way they would actually ask us this. They'll ask you something just as absurd. So just get used to seeing these things and being in this position where you have no clue, but then using all the knowledge that you have and your test taking skills to choose the best answer possible. We are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. You gave us some amazing questions. We had like almost 40 questions. So thank you very much for joining us. If you have any additional questions, want to learn more about tutoring or our tutors, you can visit our website. There should be links all over the place. If not, it's just medschoolcoach.com. If you want to schedule a one-on-one 15-minute consult with me, you can also do that through the website. This webinar will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel afterwards. So if you want to come back and hear some of the things that we said, it should be available within 24 to 48 hours. We really look forward to hearing from you guys. We hope that we get a chance to work with some of you. If not, I hope that this was very informative for you, and I hope that you're going to kind of take away from this, a few key points. And good luck on your exam. We all wish you the best.
Thank you,
All
everyone.
right. Take care, guys.
Thank you, everyone.